Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I will be telling you why Kevin McCloud is talking out of his arse. At the beginning of October, there was a Kevin McCloud article in the Evening Standard where Kevin says the whole house building market and model is broken, which I don't agree with, and I'm going to go through the article and tell you exactly why. Now, before I do that, it's probably important to, what I want to do is differentiate between, within the house building market, you've got the major house builders that build the vast majority of the homes in this country, and then you've got many smaller SME developers and house builders. Nowhere near enough. And we really need to rebuild the smaller house building industry. And that's really one of my sort of main goals and targets. Personally, I am an SME house builder and small developer myself. And to talk, one of the biggest problems in this industry is people slagging off house builders and developers like we're the bad guys, when ultimately it is us that need to do all of the hard work, and it is hard work, trust me, to get homes built. So to when people that don't really know what they're talking about go bandying about comments, and people end up listening to this stuff and believing it, and it is not helpful, right? So whilst I do agree with some of the stuff that Kevin says, and we're going to get into that in a second, a lot of it is just wrong. And we got to remember, house builders are not just the big guys, and if we do rely just on the big guys, the housing crisis is never going to get solved, right? So anyway, let's get into the detail. The living legend takes on the housing system as Grand Designs Live celebrates 25 years. So the Evening Standard interviews Kevin McCloud to get his thoughts on a landmark year for the show and what he'd like to see in the upcoming budget, and pleasingly, he was in fearlessly outspoken form. So Kevin starts by saying, I've designed a commemorative tea towel. We should be selling the tea towel at the exhibition. I don't know why we're not doing that. It's a limited edition tea towel, but I think it's got huge commercial potential. Now, Kevin has designed a commemorative tea towel. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've actually won 3 Evening Standard house building awards and actually built and got planning for over 7,000 homes. So I think I'm at least as qualified as Kevin to talk about this stuff, even though I must put my hands up and admit that I have never yet designed a commemorative tea towel myself. Anyway, so Kevin says, here's the thing. This government, like all previous governments, is obsessed by numbers. Politicians make this classic mistake, in my view, of confusing quality with quantity. They demand enough numbers and somehow expect the market to respond by delivering those numbers. Actually, the whole house building market and model is broken. It's entirely organised around profit and the return to shareholders. Now, I think we have to be focused on numbers to some extent, because at least if the fact that we don't have targets, then there is no real incentive. There's nothing to measure things against, and all that will happen is what's happened for the past 40 years, where housing numbers will go down and down and down and down. So of course we've got to have numbers, we've got to have targets. And in actual fact, if you think about it, Michael Gove effectively getting rid of the 5-year housing land supply in his revisions to the MPPF just before the government got booted out was one of the things that really put a brake on and slowed things down. So of course, absolutely, we need targets. You've got to be focused on numbers in order to make things happen, but not numbers at any cost. Of course, we all want and agree that it's got to be good quality housing. So now, in terms of the bit about the whole market is entirely organised around profit and return to shareholders, well, not entirely organised. Obviously, the big developers and the PLCs have got to deliver for shareholders. That is one of the problems with the industry. If anything, it's actually one of the problems with the world, isn't it? The fact that the focus just on profit, it's one of the reasons, everything's going to shit, basically, isn't it? So I don't totally disagree with that. And I do know how it works in that world. Remember, I used to work for PLC house builders for 10 years. That was 20 plus years ago. So, but it's not just the big house builders. Personally, I'm really keen to try to rebuild the SME house building and development market, as I bang on about a lot. And of course, there's not necessarily any sort of big shareholders involved, but we do need to make a profit. This is a super risky, hard business. It really is. People tend not to believe that, I think, and think that developers all make fortunes and it's easy. Well, if that was the case, why are there now so few of them? If you look at I've talked about these statistics before, the Home Builders Federation last survey I saw back in 2017 tells us that there were 12,500 smaller house builders and SME developers in 1988, up to the point where the survey was done at the time, 2017, it had gone down to 2,500. So, and now, they're the latest statistics I've seen, guaranteed it will be even less. There is a total correlation with the number of houses getting built, or rather not getting built, and the number of developers there are around to build them. So, and that's why articles like this really get on my tits, because when people are sort of talking out of the arse about how things really work, all it does is puts more pressure on us all. The more misunderstanding in this industry about how things really work, the harder it makes for everyone. They either won't come into the industry, or the ones that are in the industry give up and go bankrupt. That has been the case for the last 40 years. The statistics are there. You've just got to go and look at them. If it was easy and you made fortunes, as people like to believe, there'd be loads of us out there doing it, and there'd be lots of housing getting built. That's not the way it is. So what else does he say? It's all about the numbers. This is Kevin now. He's saying it's all about the numbers, and he just wishes that a government would turn around and say, we believe in delivering a quality of life, a quality of service, and a quality experience in architecture. So I absolutely 100% agree with that. And the government or governments have made moves towards that. A focus on good design is much higher up the agenda than it ever was in the past. Really important thing. Personally, I really about good design and doing good quality stuff. So I agree with him on that stuff. Kevin goes on to say that he thinks civilization can be judged on 4 counts: education, social care, healthcare, and housing, by which I mean, he says, affordable housing. Again, I pretty much agree with that. I grew up in a council house. If it was up to me, I would build 50% affordable housing on every site, everywhere. But unfortunately, it just is not financially viable. And this is really the thing that lots and lots of people miss. The issue isn't so much greedy developers. And I'm not saying that there aren't any greedy developers. And I'm not saying that, the big PLCs don't have to be driven by profit because they've got to, deliver returns to their shareholders, obviously. But the real issue is land values and viability. Yeah, and at the end of the day, we've got to meet and beat existing use values in order to persuade landowners to sell. Yeah, and at the same time, we've still got to have a sensible profit in that deal to make it worth our while for what is a super, super complicated, complex and risky business. It just is. And there's not, interest rates go up, bill costs go up, market goes down, market goes flat. You either make no money or go bust. That is the way it is. If you know anything about land economics, go and Google the cobweb model. I'll probably do an episode on the cobweb model in the future. So, re-quality. Kevin says he thinks it would manifest itself better if we did something like the Scottish government have said, that is, let's move towards passive housing. Let's demand that every new home is built to a really high environmental standard. Let's move towards increased space, better storage, and use of more architects in the social housing sector. So I don't disagree with the sort of principle of any of that. And let's say in an ideal world, yes, we would have that. But the fact of the matter is, in reality, we have always got this issue to deal with of land values and viability. And it's much harder for the smaller guys who have got, higher management costs, higher overheads, higher finance costs, and all the rest of it. So it's hard enough anyway. Even the big guys, you've just got Barratt and Redrow having to merge and consolidate, right? Because that's how difficult it can be. So whilst I don't really, in principle, disagree with what Kevin is talking about here, but, move towards passive housing. I mean, unfortunately, the problem is the super... And I've just built 3 net zero houses, by the way, that have just actually won 2 categories at the London Evening Standard New Homes Awards in 2024. So I know exactly how this stuff works, right? Building super sustainably is very, very expensive. Most of the time, it is financially unviable. I was only able to make it work on my current site because it was a joint venture with the landowner. So basically the land was in the deal for free. Yeah. Now it's pretty unusual that happens. Most of the time as house builders, we're in the market, we're in competitive situations. We've got to maximize the land value and reach a certain price in order to actually persuade the landowner to sell and get a deal done. That to a large extent is the crux of the issue. If you've got cheap land or free land, then it's a completely different story. You're a housing association or not for profit in some way. Then actually, it's sometimes easier to deliver more in terms of sustainability and affordable housing and all the other really important things that are required. But you can't really do it on private sector, open market, competitive land situations, which is what we're dealing with most of the time. Certainly if you're a smaller person. Yeah. Just a quick word to say thank you to our sponsors, Landtech, creators of Land Insight, which is the industry-leading bit of software to help developers find and analyse the potential of real 100% off-market development opportunities. I've been involved in the business for over 10 years now, and if you don't know what it basically does what people like me used to have to do the old-fashioned way, which is hunt around and get together all of the key information that's needed in order to make sensible decisions on the development potential of land. So that's planning data, market research, lists of all of the various constraints, environment and agency information, you name it, massive long list of all of the stuff that you need in order to find out who owns land, what policy constraints there might be, and exactly what you may or may not be able to do with it. All of the industry leading developers use it, and also the most clued up smaller ones. So if you're not already using it and you want to trial for yourself, have a look in the show notes. You'll find a link to get a free trial, test it for yourself, see what you think, and hopefully get busy finding real off-market development opportunities. So thanks again to our show sponsors, Landtech, and let's get back to the show. So what else does he say? Oh, well, this one, unbelievable. Let's give local authorities the power to improve and demand better from builders. With building standards over and above those set by national government, there's no sign as yet from this government that anything is changing. Well, that's wrong, right? The building requirements have been increasing and are all of the time. We've got the future home standard going to be coming into force very soon, all of which is really good, important stuff, and I'm not arguing with. But to let local authorities then start, all having their own policies, I mean, it's difficult enough with planning policy. Once they start getting involved in, technical issues and building regs, it would be an absolute nightmare. One of the biggest problems for smaller developers is literally the admin, the paperwork, the moving of the goalposts, the box ticking. And I'm not saying, and I'm someone that wants to do stuff right, wants to do it to high quality. I'm massively focused on good design, but you would never know unless you were in the industry at the coalface, i.e. the people having to build the houses. You would have no idea, the bullshit we have to deal with, to be quite honest, which is why it really gets on my nerves when people like Kevin are sort of making comments like this when he doesn't know what he's on about because he's not out there doing it, And the time he did try to do it, it went tits up. So he knows how difficult it is. And comments like this do not help things. So he goes on. In 2016, Eric Pickles, and in January of this year, Michael Gove also said, actually, no, we don't think local government should be allowed to get involved in that stuff, which I actually agree with. Now, I'm not saying I love those two, by the way, but I think it is right to minimise interference. I mean, there are too many rules, regulations, standards, most of it very often conflicting already without adding in a further layer. So that's that. Katie Lloyd, The Standard, also next asked, you said before that you think lobbying should be banned. How do you feel about the current scandal around donations? Kevin says, I think lobbying should be banned. I think it's an anti-democratic process. It's very simple. Why should a few powerful elite individuals running global corporations have the ability to manipulate and sway government policy to the detriment of the needs of the rest of us? 100% agree with that. Absolutely 100% agree with that. So I'm starting to like Kevin again now because, well, certainly in terms of the bit about why should a few powerful elite individuals running global corporations have the ability to manipulate and sway government policy. Whoever those people are, it's clearly them that's running the world and controlling and manipulating governments, is it? It's certainly not proper democracy. Anyway, so I'm 100% agreed on that one. So it goes on. Back to the question of whether 1.5 million houses are realistic. Do you think that it shouldn't be done on the numbers at all? Kevin says, this is a classic. I'm starting to go off him again. You have a housing market which has moved from a position in 2009 where it was trying to deliver against government targets to one today where profits on the average new home have jumped from £6,000 per dwelling on average to £65,000 per new dwelling on average. Where he gets those figures from, I really don't know. I've no idea what he's talking about there. But he's effectively trying to infer that developers' profits have massively tenfold plus increased between 2009 and today, which is just wrong. It's like now he's back to talking out of his arse again. So, and he goes on to say, and in that time, by the way, costs have remained static. It'd be interesting, we'll have to find the proper statistics, but I can pretty much guarantee you costs would have gone up at least 40% since 2009. They've probably gone up 30% in the last 3 years in terms of build costs. So he's wrong again about that. So, but he's basically saying that costs have remained static and land values have remained relatively static. And he goes on, for these developers, the focus has shifted from delivering against government targets to delivering profits to shareholders. For a property developer, personally, I'm a bit sort of anti-capitalist, really. I'm a, you know, not what you would imagine, but it shouldn't be all about profit. However, we do need a minimum level, sensible level of profit in order to make it worth the risk, particularly in this industry, and particularly if you are a smaller house builder or developer. So, but of course, you know, within reason, we want to do good stuff, but you know, yeah, of course we want to make a profit. Profit on its own shouldn't be a dirty word. I'm not, and house builders of all sizes, shapes, and they do want to build more stuff. So the inference that we don't, and that it's us that somehow holding back the delivery of housing, again, is just absolutely ridiculous, right? So he's wrong there. He then goes on about Persimmon. He says in March 2022, they turned over £4.4 billion and made a 25% profit of £1.1 billion. These are rough generalised figures, but in any other industry, 25% profits would be seen as obscene. Well, look, I'm not saying, like I told you, I don't like Persimmon. I don't like some of the stuff that's happened with them in the past and their management and crazy, stupid bonuses and the shite that they have developed. But I would say 25% profit in a super high risk industry where there are many, many years when you make zero profit, and actually, certainly the smaller house builders actually go bankrupt and bust. That's why we haven't got many of them. Yeah, so to be trying to hammer us, certainly the smaller ones, on the profit is just unreasonable. You can carry on doing that and talking about that, but all that will happen, as has happened, is you will get no smaller house builders, and you will turn it into a monopoly when it's only the big guys that can survive. And remember, and even those big guys, you look at their profits long term, they're not always at that level. Go and look at Barratt's profits just this year, for example. Yeah. So again, making comments like that out of context are not helpful. But I do agree that I don't like persimmon either. Anyway, so it goes on. So it doesn't matter what government targets are set, it's just irrelevant to that industry. He says, does that industry want to deliver against government targets? Does it really want to deliver a surfeit of housing or to deliver against demand? Why would it do that? Because that creates basically a situation where you've supplied everything that's demanded of you, in which case prices start to come down. No one's interested in the industry and prices coming down. They want prices to go up. Look, even if you abolished planning tomorrow and said anyone can build anything anywhere they like, right? You would still never meet demand because you couldn't build enough homes quick enough, right? So to suggest that, and of course, businesses want to do as much as possible. They want to make as much as possible. So that's just another ridiculous statement. Yeah. He goes on. The question is around, I think we're already seeing the result of the poor quality with the ongoing cladding scandal, which is a scandal and is diabolical, agreed in a whole load of ways. So Kevin goes on, what we're seeing there is 40 years worth of lack of training and investment in professional standards within construction. Agreed, diabolical, not training people, not having apprenticeships for the last 40 plus years has led us to where we are now, where there's now a massive problem in the industry with the lack of skilled people. So agreed on that one. He goes on, nobody was prepared to take accountability. Nobody was prepared to take responsibility. Everybody was hoping, praying, cheating, ignoring, and it's a scandal which is waiting to be repeated. Well, I don't know about everybody, so, that's not quite right, but absolutely the lack of training and investment has been diabolical. Agreed on that. He goes on, we have a supply chain which has been de-skilled over 40 years and professionals have been effectively emasculated. They've been removed from the accountability and the verification processes within the supply chain. So engineers have been replaced through processes like design and build. Well, not really. I wouldn't agree on that. Instead, you've got managers in development companies trying to value engineer schemes down in price. Well, we do need to have to build things sensibly and economically, and that doesn't mean building cheap shit. But remember, the name of the game is we've got to maximise land values to get deals done, unless you've got free or subsidised land or you're not for profit, and then it's a little bit easier. He goes on to say, and we're only interested in making a sale. Well, no. Certainly the smaller developers and house builders, the ones I know and work with, are really interested in creating good quality housing and of course making a profit, because we're not in business for fun or just for fun. And I've got to tell you, it ain't a lot of fun being a house builder, certainly not a small one, right? So if you were doing it just for the love of it, well, that's why no one does, because it's just too much of a ball ache, right? So he goes on, it starts talking about Grenfell was a huge and terrible thing involving the loss of great life, and it was a tragedy on a national scale. Well, of course, again, 100% agreed with that. But just one little thing to add on that, because the house builders have taken a bit of a hammering for that, whereas in fact they're, and look, certainly when it comes to quality of workmanship and stuff like that, they're not always brilliant. So absolutely, that is a thing that needs to be considered. But in actual fact, everyone was building to building regs. So the question is, were the building regs correct? Right? So, That's not the responsibility of the house builders. That's the responsibility of the building regs. That's one thing to say. And in fact, the most guilty party in all of this were the manufacturers and suppliers of some of the cladding, who I'm sure you will know were actually fiddling the test results, to make stuff look like it conformed when it didn't. Now, how those people have been allowed to get off the hook, I don't know. House builders have been hammered, I suppose, because they couldn't really run away anywhere. They had to stay here building stuff. They've got sites in planning, etc., etc. So all that's happened is, the government have grabbed hold of the only people they could really get hold of. Whereas in actual fact, the cladding industry and panel manufacturers in particular were the ones that really needed hammering, because, actually lying and fiddling and bullshitting test results, the people that did that should be in prison. Why they're not, I don't know. You need to ask yourself about that. So we are agreed on that. Absolutely. He goes on. More positively, this is a question, what do you think about REBA's Neve Brown Award for Social Housing and all of the interesting council housing projects? Now, just before we go on, I love council housing projects. I love affordable housing projects. They have created some of the best housing around, both historically. There's been some good affordable schemes in the past, particularly when you had things like the Barbican and Parker Morris standards and things like that. But there's also been a whole load of shite as well. But nowadays there's some really good social housing stuff. But again, it's not for profit sector, and it's very often on regeneration schemes or situations where you've got free land. So that's great, and it's brilliant, and it's the way it should be. But this really does need to be differentiated from the private market, where we've got to make a profit and we've got to meet and beat landowners' expectations. So we're not talking about exactly the same thing. So that needs to be made clear. So he goes on. So talking about good quality council housing, social housing. This is something we talk about a lot on Grand Designs Live. A question which often gets asked is, how come all this tech that we see on Grand Designs isn't on my local housing? How come they're still putting radiators in homes? Kevin says, I'm afraid that the tech leapfrogs the private sector and goes straight into the social housing sector. So the one area still employing architects, where you see underfloor heating, infrared heating, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar panels, new tech, etc., is the social housing sector. Well, it's not the one sector, because I've just put all of that stuff in my latest development, just so you know. But he does go on. He says, where social landlords take a really long-term view about the well-being of their occupants and their tenants, which they do, which is great. But remember, it's a slightly different model. They are, it's land economics is the whole issue in this business. It's the whole problem, really. The fact that the private sector has to meet and beat land values. It's land prices are the issue, basically. So anyway, he goes on, and it's ironic, isn't it, that we end up building bigger homes with better standards to a higher level of performance to give people more comfortable, low carbon and low cost homes in the UK in the social housing sector. Well, I'm not sure. It's sort of ironic, but it's just a factor of the fact that, you got different economics. You've got cheap or free land, and you don't need to make a profit. That's the way it works that way. He goes on, final question, and I find this extraordinary thing. He says, for example, up in Lancaster, a wonderful passive house scheme of 40 new homes was built by a local developer for a local housing association, right? And he made a profit. So remember, right, local developer, local housing association, and he made a profit. Fantastic, but I don't know whether you really call that guy more of a builder or a developer, because the thing is, if you're doing it for a housing association, it's more like a building contract. It's not a speculative development. So it's a different thing. And he goes on, he says he made about 12 to 15% profit on the thing. He was happy. Well, he probably was relatively happy, because if you're a building contractor, 12 to 15% is more than you would have made if you were just building it for someone else as but it's a different thing. It isn't private speculative development. So again, I think what Kevin's inferring here is that developers should be prepared to work on margins like that, which is the thing that really, really, really pissed me off. Because I'll tell you now, and I know it for an absolute fact, developers, private speculative developers, you go doing deals on 12 to 15% profit margins. It doesn't take much. Interest rates go up, build costs goes up, market goes flat, market goes down, and you will be bust just like that. And that is the reason we have got so few SME house builders and developers in the UK now. So he's wrong about that, and absolutely back to talking out of his arse. And he goes on. And all across the country, we found local authorities fighting the government to try and set their own building standards. Well, I mean, I've already told you why that's not a good idea. He then goes on and says, Michael Gove was supposed to come to Leicester to look at housing with us, but he reneged on that. Well, Michael Gove has reneged on the whole lot of things. Kevin and I probably would agree on what we think about Michael Gove. And that's about it, really. So overall, I agree with Kevin McCloud on some things. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. And importantly, he shouldn't be talking about things that he doesn't understand. Well, look, we can all talk about things we don't understand, can't we? Everyone's entitled to an opinion. But there you are. And I suppose so important takeaways from that, social housing development, not-for-profit development, pre-land, cheap land, major house builders with, big management teams, big experience, cheaper finance, etc. All of that is very, very, very different to how it works down at the other end of the market, where you've got SME house builders and developers just trying to find some sites and build some nice houses on a reasonable profit margin. That's how it used to be. If you think about it, all your nice little areas here and there around the country where there's, you've got some arts and craftsy looking houses, hopefully you can imagine the type of things, very often they are things that were built by small house builders. They might have built just one a year. They might have built 5 a year. The bigger ones might have built 20 or 50 or 100 or even 200 a year, right? So lots of the greatest, nice best private housing in this country is and was built by smaller house builders and developers. If we want more of that, which I certainly do, then we need more of the people able to build it, and things need to be not so difficult for them. So to sort of in any way imply or infer that it's easy is just wrong and not helpful. So that is the end of that. So Kevin, who I am sure is a lovely man, can, as a general rule, stick his article where the sun doesn't shine, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.